have a reception on the other end of the event. So the great energy that we see for sharing and networking, we can carry forward into the reception. We do very much hope that you'll be able to stick around and enjoy that. I'm Scott Fulton, president of the Environmental Law Institute, and it's my pleasure and privilege to welcome you here this afternoon to what has proven to be a very popular program, and we're pleased by that. We're very glad that this event is drawing the kind of energy that it is, and at ELI we're super excited about the ELI WELL program, Women in Environmental Law and Leadership, and are anxious to see where it can carry. For those of you who are not familiar with ELI, this is an institute that will turn 50 in December of this year. So it's 50 years of working to build effective governance and rule of law in the environmental space through this very special nonpartisan platform that's a composite of publisher, educator, researcher, and convener, and applying itself both here and abroad. When Martha Marapiece of Wiley Ryan approached us about this idea of women in environmental law and leadership as a new community within the Environmental Law Institute community, we were thrilled by the notion, enthusiastically embraced it. It was an easy sell for me because women in particular served as very powerful examples and mentors for me in my own development as a lawyer and a leader. My first work after law school was at the Department of Justice. One of my immediate supervisors at that time was Carol Green, who's is Carol here? There's Carol. Wave your hand, Carol. I learned an awful lot from Carol. Our big boss was Carol Dinkins, who's really a major figure in the environmental law field. I would later work for some time for Nancy Firestone, who proved to be one of my best friends and one of my primary mentors. And Nancy's now a judge on the Federal Court of Claims, and she probably gave me my primary instruction on how to get things done in this town, despite the sometimes mad machinery within which we work. And then, of course, I had the chance to work for Carol Browner, Linda Fisher, who's here with us today, in their leadership roles at EPA, Lisa Jackson. I served as administrator. These are all amazing people, amazing leaders who happen to be women. I also observed along the way how women, when given the chance, could rescale for a time to meet family responsibilities and without missing a beat. I think of Catherine McCabe, who was a part-time senior attorney working for me at the Justice Department many years ago, for whom leadership was waiting as soon as she had the space for it. And then snapped fully back into action in senior positions at EPA and is now the head of New Jersey DEP. So let's just say that I'm a believer. And I think there's a chance that ELI WELL may prove to be the development of which I will be most proud at the end of my tenure as ELI's leader. Our ambition is simply this, to become the go-to platform for women leaders in our field. And it's very much our hope that you'll join with the amazing women behind this initiative, some of whom are in the room: Carol Green, Jane Luxton, Kathy Robb, to help make that happen. If you are not yet a member of ELI itself, we of course would hope for that, and we're pretty cheap. But we also hope that some of you might feel called to service in the ELI Leadership Council, the organization of thought leaders for which Kathy Robb is president. And that some of you might also feel drawn towards a new program that we're just getting ready to launch called ELI, the ELI Emerging Leaders Initiative. So yes, it's ELI or ELI squared. But this is an effort to create a meaningful sub-community within the ELI membership base for the next generation of environmental leaders. I did want to mention that one of the features of the WELL program is the idea of bringing the expertise of this community to places in the world where the gender environment interface could benefit from it. And I wanted to flag for you as an example of a possible service opportunity in this regard, a project that we're doing with the Stockholm International Water Institute to build the capacity of a network of 30+ women in the Nile River Basin to do water diplomacy work through an online platform whereby leaders like yourselves can share their expertise and experience. Jess Troll, Jess, you in the room? There's Jess. Wave your hand. Jess, stand up, Jess, please. Jess is our person in Africa and also our primary lead on gender issues at the Environmental Law Institute. She's running this project for us. She will be here on July 8th to do a brown bag program on this project. So we're hoping that many of you will choose to come to that, so we can start to put flesh on this service dimension of ELI WELL also. So if you want to hear more about that, either chase Jess down at the reception or look for an announcement on this in the near term. Okay, I think I've probably talked longer than Kathy wanted me to, so let me get this into Kathy's hands and capable hands. Kathy, as I mentioned, is the president of the ELI Leadership Council. She's a partner at Cy Padgett in New York, and more importantly, one of the primary sources of goodness and support here at the Environmental Law Institute. So Kathy, over to you.
All right, thank you, Scott. I want to thank ELI and all of you who are in the room who came, and for those of you, there are tons of people on webinar and in San Francisco and in New York as well. I want to give a special thanks to Ken Rivlin and Alan and Overy in New York, who's hosting there, and to Paul Hastings and Deborah Schmall and Jill Young, who's hosting in San Francisco. So welcome, everyone. This program was hatched last year as part of a discussion of the 50th anniversary of ELI over a steak dinner that I had with Robin Marks. It was a really good dinner in New York City. And I want to thank Robin, who's in the back there, for conceptualizing the program with me. The 50th anniversary and this program is particularly meaningful to me at Cy Padgett and Roselle, because David Sive was a co-founder of ELI, and I know he would be thrilled that we are celebrating the 50th in this way. So every lawyer knows the power of a compelling story. Most of us have heard the stories of the men who developed environmental law and policy and their achievements and their hardships in doing so, but we're less likely to know about the women or to connect their actions to mold environmental policy and law to prior efforts by women in the abolitionist, public health, suffragette, civil rights reforms movements. We're looking at these topics as part of ELI's 50th anniversary. If you want to take a deeper dive into them, we're going to be posting just sort of some reference materials after the program. And there's going to be an article on the topic in the 50th Anniversary Environmental Forum magazine later this year. But in the meantime, if you want to get started immediately, you should check out the interviews of the 24 environmental pioneers on the ELI website, which were organized and produced by our former ELI president, Leslie Crothers, who's here today as well. Thank you, Leslie. Today, through our panel, we're going to focus on just a piece of the story of women in environmental law, what they did, what it was like, and what it might look like in the future. And we'll see that sustainability is a theme that runs throughout this story. I want to briefly introduce our terrific panel. If I told you all of their credentials, we would end our program on that note. So I've just picked out a few little highlights. Diane Dillon Ridgely has been active in human rights, gender, environment, and corporate sustainability for more than 35 years. She's currently the director of WNSF, the Women's Network for a Sustainable Future. She just received in 2019 the Women Pioneer in Sustainability Award from Women's E-News, and last week from the National Wildlife Federation, the first ever DEIJ Award, which is Diversity, Equity, Inclusion, and Justice. She represented the White House in global negotiations on the environment in the 1992 Earth Summit in Rio, the 1997 UN General Assembly 5-year assessment of Rio, and the 2002 World Summit on Sustainable Development in South Africa. And she's the only person to have served on all 3 delegations. She is the first woman who was elected to the Global Water Partnership in Sweden. She chaired the board of the Center for International Environmental Law, CL, and was the first woman to do that.
And black person, too.
And black person. And she served 18 years on the board of Interface, which is a global leader in sustainable design of commercial carpet tiles, and 6 years on the board of Green Mountain Energy. And she began her professional life as an intern at EPA. Linda Fisher, until very recently, there she is, until very recently, was the Vice President, Safety, Health, and Environment, and the Chief Sustainability Officer of DuPont over 12 years. She was the first Chief Sustainability Officer of a publicly traded company, and she led development of DuPont's 2020 sustainability goals. Prior to that, she was the U.S. EPA Deputy Administrator from 2001 to 2003, and then between 83 and 93, she served, not at the same time, as EPA Assistant Administrator, Office of Prevention, Pesticides, and Toxic Substances, EPA Assistant Administrator of Office of Policy Planning and Evaluation, and as Chief of Staff to the EPA Administrator. In her first decade, that period before she was Deputy Administrator, she held more high-ranking positions than anyone in the agency's history and developed the agency's first position on climate change. She also, prior to that, was Vice President of Government Affairs for Monsanto, and she was in private practice. She has a lot of energy.
She's tired now.
She serves on numerous boards, including ELI's, Resolve, and the National Parks Foundation, and she began as a legislative assistant in the U.S. House of Representatives. Bet some stories there. Seema Hockaday is the assistant professor at the University of Maryland Carey School of Law and the director of the Environmental Law Clinic there. The clinic is a nationally recognized law clinic operating at the state, local, and national and international levels. And it allows students to provide free legal advice and representation to nonprofit organizations advocating for a wide range of public health and natural resources protections. The clinic actually received the 2018 ABA Award for Best Student Program. Prior to joining the law school, she served as an attorney with EPA's Office of Civil Enforcement and DOE's Office of General Counsel. She won numerous awards at both agencies, including bronze and silver medals for service, and she twice received the EPA Administrator's Award for Excellence. The work at the agencies included some of the largest enforcement actions, including the Clean Power Plan and the Volkswagen diesel emissions case. Prior to government service, she was the co-director of the India program at ELI and a litigations associate in private practice. Peggy Shepard. Peggy is the executive director and co-founder of We Act for Environmental Justice in New York City, which was founded in 1988. New York's first environmental justice organization created to improve the health and quality of life in communities of color. In 2018, she was awarded the National Audubon Society's President's Award. She received the 10th Annual Heinz Award for the Environment. She received the 2008 Jane Jacobs Medal for Lifetime Achievement from the Rockefeller Foundation. Seems like a little early for lifetime achievement, but you're an early bloomer. She received the Dean's Distinguished Service Award from Columbia Mailman School of Public Health. She's currently on numerous boards, in addition to running We Act, including the National League of Conservation Voters, Environmental Defense, the Mount Sinai Children's Environmental Health Center, and she also serves as a member of the National Academy's Committee on America's Climate Choices. She was previously president of the National Women's Political Caucus in Manhattan and is a former elected West Harlem Democratic Assembly district leader for 8 years. She was the first female chair of the National Environmental Justice Advisory Council to US EPA, and she began as a journalist. And I assure you, they have a lot more awards. They have honorary degrees. They have other jobs. We just don't have time to talk about it. Let's get right into the discussion then with our panelists. And we're going to start with Diane. We're going to have a free-flowing discussion, and anybody can jump in on a question, but we'll start with one speaker to open it. So Diane, mentoring has long been the holy grail of professional women generally, and many articles and studies have been done over the past 3 decades as professionals continue to try to define how important mentoring is and what makes the most effective mentoring program. Do you want organic development of the kinds of relationships that mentoring is supposed to provide, or do you want assigned pairings as part of a formal program? Do you want to assign men or women to women in a law firm, for example? Do you want someone in the same practice area or not? Who do you consider your key mentors, if you had them, and how did you connect with them initially, and how important a role do you think mentoring plays in developing professionally?
Huge. But I'm going to take a second or two of personal privilege first. June 20th is traditionally one of my favorite days because it's the longest day. Obviously, it still has 24 hours, but it's supposed to have more daylight. I live in Iowa, so I came all the way here for this and wouldn't have done otherwise because I want to say something really, really nice about Kathy. You said all those wonderful things. But I know that this day and this program is at the heart of Kathy's concern and interest. And I would be remiss to not acknowledge that. She's been the chair of the board of WNSF almost the whole time since I've been part of it. And it's been delightful to get to work with her. What you wouldn't know, though, is we're both from Dallas. So, yes. So I'm going to refer back to yesterday. Now, how many people in the room, I know 3 of them do, well, 4. How many people in the room know what Juneteenth is? Oh, see, I should have known this would be a very...
We celebrate Emancipation Day here in the district.
Yes, but those of us in Texas had 2 years later to wait before, and very few texts put the real reason. They waited until the crops had been put in the ground, had been planted before they did the announcement. Now, I don't know what happened in 1864, because it was 1865, but the news actually was available a little bit before, but they made sure all the crops were, you get the cynicism that I'm conveying, was put in. But the other thing I want to say, though, goes back to the fact that we're both from Dallas. Now, Kathy and I would not have really had a lot of interaction when we were growing up. Well, first of all, because I'm older. I think I might have been in middle school, probably by the time you were in primary grades. We don't really deal in years. But the other reason we wouldn't have been close associates in Dallas is just because it was the end of the vestiges of Jim Crow. And it was, I mean, the lines, there were red lines for insurance and property values. There was a Central Expressway, which is now I-75, that was 75? Yeah. Anyway, it's one of those. It was really, really a very, very divided place. And so we had to come all the way to New York and DC and the National Town Meeting in 1990 in Detroit before we really were able to have our paths crossed. And nobody's going to separate us since then. So that's a little bit of the beginning. Mentors have been critical, without a doubt. And there are two kinds for me. There have been, I always have for the last 30 years used the term sheroes. There have been sheroes who were legendary. Most people who know me know that Bella Abzug was probably the most intense for the longest. Everybody in the room know Bella Abzug? Mm-hmm. Well, now it just is painful to me. So I tell all women, you need to write books. You need to write history. You need to write who you were and what you did. Because if you don't, within a generation and a half, it can sort of just be amorphous. Well, wasn't it always there? Bella and I were on, I'm going to be paid. Bella and I were on a flight to Egypt for the International Conference on Population and Development in '94. And the flight attendants were they screwed up her seat. She was supposed to be in first class. But they were being like, well, who is she? I said, look, you need to know, you have those seats for your guaranteed rest period. This is the woman who did this when she was in Congress. And it was really quite an attitude adjustment on their part, because I wasn't subtle about making the point. But, it's just, she had done so much. Her first day in Congress, she petitioned for the Vietnam War to be ended. And her first case was William, but I'll get off track, so I'll behave a bit. So Bella founded the Women's Environment and Development Organization, along with Mem Kelber. And we had Vandana Shiva. This is from, what year was this one? 98, because she passed away March 31st. She said, nope, got to go in the month of Women's History Month. But anyway, that's Vandana Shiva, that's Wangari Maathai, Thais Corral, Chief B.C. Angalela, that's Brownie from Arkansas, Brownie Ledbetter, that's Ellen Ing from Norway, that's Jocelyn Dow from Guyana, that's Maxine Waters. In other words, she brought together women from everywhere, and that's me. That's the motorcycle, but that was from a World Bank event. And so I now go into the next part of the mentoring. She brought together, along with Joni Martin Brown. Any of the people in this room know Joni Martin Brown? Mm-hmm. She was actually married to William O. Douglas for 3 years, and I didn't know that for a long time. But she put together the financing because she was vice president. Well, she was vice president for UNEP North America, UN Environmental Program. And she put the financing together for the most powerful meeting I've ever attended in my life. It was over 3 days. It was in Miami, November of 1991, and it was the World Women's Congress for a Healthy Planet. I often refer to it, it was 1,500 women and good non-women from 83 countries. Sometimes it takes a little longer to get that. From 83 countries who came together to focus on what had initially been missing in the deliberations and the preparations for the Earth Summit, which was the first, global meeting for the largest, not the first, that was Olaf Palmer in 72, the largest global meeting for the environment, not around, economics or war. And I remember there were 30,000 journalists there. So I don't even remember how many people, but it was a big deal, to say the least. And I'm looking at Bernice, and both Peggy and I will probably refer to Bernice, but I'll get there. So Bella was one. Wangari Maathai was a colleague and a mentor as well. And she was the recipient of the Nobel Peace Prize in 2004 for starting the Greenbelt movement, which has to date planted over a couple of billion trees. And you think about that's a lot of trees. And her daughter, Wanjira, if any of you attended the Goldman Environmental Prize this year, her daughter Wanjira was the MC for that. And maybe we'll have time at some point to go through a little more details, but I want to make sure I get through everybody. And I have to thank my son because rushing to the plane that was 4 hours late yesterday morning, I left my prepared speech. So he did in fact send me.
You're doing okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
So he sent me the list. So there's this one page. So I want to make sure I mention everybody. But some of them, as I said, like Bella, who was a congresswoman who spent the last part of her political structure focusing on the UN. And the reason we have the 12 categories of civil society at the UN are a direct result to the work that happened with the Women's Caucus, which really shaped and moved the entire conference. But also there were people, two of whom I got to meet, one and another one, probably the most riveting moment at a ethical challenging crossroads. So the first one was Fannie Lou Hamer. I went to Howard for undergrad. And in 1972, for our commencement, you always give honorary doctorates and whatnot. And this was the period when people were closing down schools and we were repairing and getting back to civility and normalcy. But the students nominated Fannie Lou Hamer, and it's one of the most rich and empowering. And I mean, I'm not totally stumbling, but kind of, because I don't know if I can help you understand what it meant to me, but more so what it meant to her, because I was on the committee that picked her. And she only lived a few years after that. She died of breast cancer. And she was not a particularly, people know, and she's had a stamp and other things. She was the force, is maybe not the organizer and the chair, but she was the force behind the Mississippi Democratic Freedom. Well, I know the Freedom Party. Okay, that's it. Okay. And when she came up to the microphone after receiving the honorary doctorate, tears, before she even started speaking, tears were coming down her face. She said, you just don't know how much this means to me when your own people acknowledge and recognize. She said, because all that stuff I did that for you children. Because to her, I mean, we were children to her. But you can get how I'm still emotionally full when I talk about it, because she was not a particularly educated woman, but I mean, one of my favorite quotes is, I'm sick and tired of being sick and tired. And so she really was putting the environment together, but her way of addressing it was through a political process that was extant. The other woman that I wanted to mention is Uma Malone. Now, Uma Malone is from Homer, Louisiana. And when Bennett Johnson, it's too long to tell the story, but Bennett Johnson was leaving the Senate, and he wanted to put LES, Louisiana Energy Services, in Louisiana, which would be a nice little financial cushion for him. Well, LES was going to take the spent uranium rods from the French nuclear power and the Japanese nuclear power and bury them in Louisiana. They don't even bury their people in Louisiana. It is so inappropriate. I mean, this was just nuts. And so they targeted unincorporated African-American communities, thinking that they would be easy targets. And of course, they always waved the tenor of jobs. Well, some of us who were asked to be part of helping on the assessment and resistance to this went through, and they had given a number of hundreds and hundreds of jobs. Well, once we did the analysis of the educational background of the people in the community, there were 2 jobs that were going to be available that anyone in that area qualified for, and they were janitors. So you know where that story's going. But there was a meeting, and that's the point. And I've never been so hot in my life. It was, one light bulb on a string down to a plug. And we had been in the room for a really, really long time. And Uma Malone, who was about 5'5", she was not very tall. The man who was moderating, he said, well, Miss Malone, do you have something to say? And Black women, Black church women, when they go to stand up and they first straighten out their skirt, when they move the skirt, we're near the end of the meeting. And she took about 4 minutes to stand up. And she said, well, I don't have a PhD. I don't have an MD. In fact, I don't have no D's. But I know right from wrong. This here is wrong. Nobody else spoke. He didn't ask anybody else any questions. They didn't take a vote. He just announced, well, the meeting's over. Thank you very much. We have our decision and we will deliver it in the morning. They were not going to do that. And they could try another community. But I still get goosebumps thinking about that night and thinking about what she conveyed by saying such a powerful, simple statement. I don't have a PhD. I don't have an MD. I don't have no D's, but I know right from wrong. And for women around the world, if I think of the Genki Blue Sky group in Japan, it was a group of mothers who started after the Kirikyushu exposures with Mitsubishi, and the water was this yellow green. And the mother said, well, we're patriotic. We care about Japan. And we want to do things because it's on the western coast. And it was I know I'm near the end of my time. Okay. But I'm still going to finish just quickly by going through the other names. And someday I'm going to finish, despite my commentary about everybody writing, I'm going to finish writing all of this down. But Amrita Devi in 1760 was one of the first, what? That was total time?
No, go ahead.
Okay.
No, well, let's hear a little bit more about mentoring, and then we'll come back.
Well, she was one from the reading part. But
Okay.
Gro Harlem Brundtland, Marjorie Stoneman Douglas got to meet her when she was 101. We hear about the high school where the shooting took place, but I got to meet her because she was at the meeting that Joni and Bella put together. I said Demoto's son, and I'm one quote. So Sandra Steingraber, who is very much alive and active and has written beautiful books. And we'll talk about those later too. But our bodies too are living scrolls of sort. What's written there inside the fibers of our cells and chromosomes is a record of exposure to environmental contaminants like the rings of trees. Our tissues are historical documents that can be read by those who know how to decipher the code. And so her point was, from the right to know and the duty to inquire flows the obligation to act. And that's the point. These mentors, whether they be elected officials, Brundtland, who, was prime minister 3 times, got her activism from being a physician who found a wrong. And that's my point. I think we often approach these issues, we don't necessarily go looking for them, but they're thrust in your lap. When both Bernice and Peggy started We Act, it was because of what was being foisted upon their community when Lois Gibbs and her sister Kathy Hadley, who just stepped down as chair at NWF. So if you look through, there's an approach and a passion for a recognition to this. And I decided I needed a sentence to say this, and this is my quote. To date, a woman's body is everyone's first environment. And I hope you get the point that I'm making there. I think, because people say, well, men do things too. And I say, yeah, I know. But, and whether you had a child or not, but so far, you don't fully develop all 9 months outside of a womb. And so I actually think it predisposes women to have a different slant on it, because everybody's first environment is a woman's body. So I'll close with that.
Thank you. Anybody else want to say a few words about mentoring, have some views that they want to share?
How do you follow that?
Exactly.
You know more famous women than I probably have met my whole life, and I felt like I was walking through history while you spoke. That was very powerful. I'll maybe just make a comment that's a touch more practical. When I started my career, if I was waiting for a woman mentor, I would have not had a mentor. And I thank God every day that I worked for some remarkable mentors that were all male. And the thing they had in common is they believed in me and they wanted me to succeed. And I encourage my daughter, I encourage my son and others, find somebody who wants you to succeed, who isn't threatened by the fact that you are really talented, that you want to do things, that you may see things differently. They really want you to succeed. And I think that my own career took off because I had people who wanted me to succeed, pushed me, gave me confidence when I didn't have any, told me I hadn't failed when I thought I had, fixed some things that I might have messed up. And that nowadays, it is far more likely that you can find a female mentor to help navigate, to help groom, to help teach, to help make you laugh at stuff when it's all hit the fan. But don't limit yourself to women. Don't limit yourself to women. Limit yourself to people who want you to succeed. That would be my one thought and advice.
I want to, I guess, maybe address one of the other questions that you raised, Kathy, which is more on the utility of having a formal program versus letting mentorship happen organically. Because I think that's actually a really important question. And with a lot of things, I think it in part depends. But I do think that it is important for sort of both the mentors out there. You consider yourself capable of being a mentor to somebody, to actually go take on that role and seek out somebody in a professional setting that might be in need of mentorship. And I think it's also true on the other side. Whether it's a formal program or organically, if people are not willing to step up to do it, that's really the point, I think, that really matters. And the same true for individuals that feel that they might be in need of mentorship. It's, I think, incumbent upon those people to seek out someone that they may be able to connect with, whether it's a man, whether it's a woman, whether it's, you know, a different, whether it's anybody else. And so I will also say that I do think that we tend to have concepts of formal mentor relationships when people are first starting out. And I think that it's really important for all different stages of your career. In fact, I met earlier today with a former supervisor of mine who has been retired for a number of years, and she gave me terrific advice about sort of the end of careers. And I found that to be really, really useful for the arc of career that I'm at now. And so I do think that mentorship is important throughout a career, not necessarily just in the beginning of a career, which is where we tend to focus, but careers are really, we're working for a really long time. So there's ebbs and flows in that, and different things are happening in people's lives, particularly for women, I think. And so having that mentorship thought in the back of your mind through all stages of that lengthy period, I think, is really important.
Peggy, did you want to add on this?
Sure. Just quickly, I would say I grew up at a time when I was always the only Black person in the school or in the organization, and so I have never had a mentor. I do remember, though, that my first job at the Indianapolis News, I worked for the women's page editor. She had been an award-winning editor at the Detroit Free Press, and she wanted to energize the pages, and she hired me based on a book of poems that I wrote while I was at home. And she trusted me and promoted me. I also became an editor while I was there, won a couple of awards. It wasn't necessarily mentorship, but it was probably the only person I can think of in a working career who really gave me an opportunity. And I think to be a mentor, you really have to, it is a partnership. You really want to feel a synergy of commitment. with the person that you have an interest in and helping to direct and move forward. And that just did not happen for me in my career. I'm often still the only woman in most meetings. As we know, in the environmental community in New York City, you may not be in as many advocacy circles as I am, but I'm often also the only woman, as well as being the only Black person.
Interesting. Let's stay with you. How has the environmental field evolved over time, if you think it has? And have the substantive concerns changed from your perspective?
Yeah, so in the 70s, the large environmental groups developed broad national environmental regulations around clean water, clean air, solid waste, etc., chemical policy. And then they evolved into focusing on litigation, focusing on market-based campaigns, focusing on science or research, and of course, environmental law, as well, environmental law firms and boutique firms. In the environmental justice world, we started out with a mandate to go home and build a grassroots base because we speak for ourselves. Elected officials, other environmental groups do not speak for us. And so we've spent numbers of decades working to build that grassroots base and also to be the watchdog to stop those polluting facilities, to stop the continuous environmental degradation in our communities. And over those decades, we have evolved into being the people who are bringing the green benefits to our communities, making sure that solar installation, alternative energy projects are coming to our communities, ensuring that issues like climate change and energy security are at the top of our priorities. And so the environmental movement and the environmental justice movement have evolved, and so of course have the issues. We're now very focused on climate change for very good reason. You know, we need to save the earth, the planet, and our communities. We're focused on energy and diverting our investments away from fossil fuels. We're focused on food quality, food security, food justice. And so these are all evolving issues over the past 10 or so years that are really, I think many environmental organizations have, that's been their focus.
Anyone else want to share some views?
So this is a really interesting question for me because, as Kathy mentioned, I'm a professor at the University of Maryland Law School, and I have students that come into my class and thinking environmental law is a specific thing. And one of my very first classes that I do is I say environmental law is actually everything. It's the way we turn on our lights, which you don't necessarily think about. It's maybe you're going to look at this and think it's the water, but it's actually also the glass, and it's how that glass was built. And so I go through sort of a series of examples like that to really have people understand that it's not something that is separate from us, it's part of us, and that therefore the law in many different disciplines is actually encompasses the field of environmental law in particular, and that all the courses that students are taking, whether it's torts, whether it's contracts, whether it's administrative law, whether it's criminal law, whether it's international law, and the list goes on and on, how much environmental law is integrated in all of those legal disciplines. So I do think that that concept is changing. And I do a lot of matters with the Environmental Law Clinic that are zoning, that are, squarely, I think, environmental law, but not maybe traditionally what people have thought about when they think environmental law. They think, as Peggy mentioned, the big statutes and the big, national regulation, and so much happens outside that space where once we start thinking about it as zoning, once we start thinking about it as solar and energy, which traditionally has often been a very separate discipline, we think of environmental law as encompassing lots of different things and not sort of the concept of it's these particular statutes, but it's actually a much broader view. And I do think that that is has been changing over time, maybe actually returning back to what it was originally pre-70s period in some ways.
And then I would say also that I think the environmental justice movement has been instrumental in redefining the environment, is where we live, work, play, and go to school. And we look at the issues as intersectoral, whether it's transportation, land use and zoning, food, air, water, healthy housing. So it's really very broad, which is quite exciting for new folks coming, into the environmental field. There's so many options.
I think one area that, well, it's not one area, it's several different areas. Diane mentioned sustainability and the impact or what's going on in corporate America, global corporations around sustainability. And part of that's driven by law and regulation, but a lot of it is not. A lot of it is driven by forces that are moving faster with more power than government, and they can be environmental justice groups, it can be investors, it can be the SEC, it can be the commercial chain. Companies have to do a lot of reporting to their customers who want to then be able to talk to consumers about what they've gotten. So when I started my career, it was all around the law. And when I ended, not that I've officially ended my career, but when I left DuPont, the law was one part of what we paid attention to in terms of the environmental sustainability. There was a lot more going on in the marketplace, with community groups, with global activists, with global regulation that was driving what DuPont was doing. And this is a total leap ahead, but I think the fact that women can multitask and we can take in input from a variety of places, and we don't just kind of think, well, this is the law. I think it's why we can handle some of these issues and kind of see where it's going in a way that's very unique. I get very excited about women in the whole area of sustainability. Many of the chief sustainability officers actually are women. So,
that's right.
but I think there's a way of looking at complex issues where there's a lot of people input beyond just laws and regulations, and that's all of those are very important forces today in driving industry.
And so picking right up on that.
Yes, dear.
Two reasons, or you prompted two thoughts. One, when we did a survey, I'm heavily recycled. So I've been part of a lot of different organizations. So we did a survey of EHS positions. And one reason I at least decided that there's so many were women is because they weren't line jobs that led to being the CEO or the CFO. And so it was something that you not quite volunteered, but you took it up. But it wasn't necessarily going to lead to the top job. And pretty much, and I remember when Rudy Marxum was the CFO at Unilever under Tony Bergen, then became the head of sustainability. This was, the Financial Times made a big deal out of it because here was the money guy, who was looking at this amorphous thing still yet, sustainability. But the other reason I think is, in particular, and I'd like to say, we should never forget the role that customers, parents, mothers, and I'm generous when I say parents because I'm really talking about mothers right now. Well, no, I'm not dissing guys, but I'm just saying, if I wrote the foreword to a book called Women in Green, and we were looking at designing things, and I brought little copies of these because I think these are 4 key publications. But in this, if a kid gets sick or something, or you notice something, you're the mother. We will get to the point where fathers will notice it equally. But I was married to a physician, and the kid still came to me if anything hurt or was wrong, and I noticed it before he ever had any idea what was going on with him. It's just a reality, that's all. And so you are the front line in terms of often finding this out. And because we sometimes still have coffee clutches and other things, you talk to other mothers, did your kid, I mean, this is how Lois Gitt became an activist, because it was talking to the other mothers and rejecting the authorities who kept saying to her, well, your child is aberrant, you know, and she said, so I have the only boy, you know, who would have this blah, 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 and these skin lesions, etc. And she said, well, I'm sorry, I'm not going to buy that. And then she used a profane word, and, you know, and the cameras were there, and the rest is history, kind of. So I just think it's, in addition to the part, the whole field has changed, and perhaps most of all, the language is changing, and that's powerful. I mean, I was a math and philosophy major, and epistemology at the end was very important to me, because we've named things. We named things in a way that was authoritarian, that was very, very esoteric, and it put a distance between you and what you were talking about. When your water is brown and comes out of the faucet, you don't need a whole bunch of information to say something's wrong. But the language, when you go to talk to the people who are the authorities, and say, oh, rest assured, Mrs. Blah, 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 it's no problem. It's not going to hurt you, you know, and, you know, you just don't accept that. And so the pushback in many instances has been changing the language so that it is not a language that puts you away from the issues. So you're absolutely right. We live in an environment, so therefore it's all subject and it's all risk for that milk. Okay.
Wonderful. I want to select this idea of how are the women different. I want to continue that with the idea of leadership and leadership style and women in leadership positions. And Linda, if I could turn to you, you know, you had so many leadership positions all along your career. What was your own experience about whether that was different or similar to what perhaps the men were doing? And do you think that women's roles in leadership positions and their ability to attain them have changed over time?
So yes, to all of that, I think I'm so interested by what Peggy said about being the only woman in the room sometimes, because when I started my career, let me say it differently. When I first came to EPA, I remember being surprised how many women were in the room. And that was very heartening to me. And then I was at EPA for 10 or 11 years, and I went into the private sector, and there was definitely a drop-off. I think that that's gotten more equal now. I mean, I think there's a whole lot more women. I think we focus a little bit too much on who's at the head of the organization, because I think frequently, I mean, women absolutely should have those jobs, but what will turn the tide is the feeder roles. It's who's coming up in the organizations, whether that's business or government, and are people being groomed and prepared and mentored to take on those roles? Because if you haven't had them, you can't get picked to leadership roles. And I was impressed by the programs that were put in at Monsanto when I was there, the programs that I was that DuPont had to identify women and minorities and bring them along. Not just because they cared about those issues or had to care about those issues, but because they started to value that women, minorities, people with different backgrounds bring a different perspective. And if you are dealing in a multicultural global economy, and you're dealing in issues that communities care about, and a lot of public interest groups care about, you need people that look at things differently. If you only have lawyers and scientists looking at them, they miss, right? And I think more and more companies and maybe government realize you need the different values and different perspectives if you're going to get to the right place. So I absolutely think things are changing. And then I hear Peggy say she's the only woman or the person of color in the room, and I think, oh my God, we really haven't made as much progress as I feel we have. So it's definitely more part of the conversation than it used to be. I will say we've all experienced this where a woman makes a comment, nobody pays attention. The guy makes the same comment 5 minutes later, and people go, "Oh,
Wonderful.
brilliant."
And I have the only one to tell you what I do.
I was just going to say what I do too. So
Well, I do the same thing. Because I had a good friend, Roxanne Collins, who was the head of the Bar Association's trial lawyers. She's about 5'1". And she said, when they say that, don't ask for permission. Just immediately. I'm so glad you agree with what I had to say. because if the person then proceeds to continue to own it, they're a jerk. And everybody else in the room knows it. And you've punctuated without being, asinine about it. You punctuated it. It works. You said, I'm so glad, but you got to make noise. I'm so glad you agree with what I had to say. Please continue.
Linda, what did you do?
I was going to, when I would be leading meetings and that would happen, I would kind of say the same thing. Glad you agree with Suzanne.
Anybody else want to add anything about leadership style or the role? We're good. Seema, what's your perspective on the number and the influence of women in environmental leadership today, given your work with the students just starting out?
I really think that women in leadership positions is hugely influential for women starting out. I do think that students are looking to see where they're going to end up. And I think that's a really critical piece for them. And I think, Linda, your point about the environment, particularly the environmental legal field, there are stark differences. I think that, I also was pleasantly surprised when I went from even the Department of Energy to EPA about the massive difference in the number of women. I'm continuously surprised. I was continuously surprised at EPA and enforcement by, the number of women, for example, that maybe on a large case that's going to trial at the Department of Justice, and they're working on the case team, going through civil discovery, going through motions practice, all of that. And who's actually going to the 3-week trial? All the men that are on the team, not as many of the women. And so I do think that there are these pockets, and maybe in Peggy's world, there are more pockets than we would like to see of areas where there is a lack still. And I do think trial teams are a big one, of a lack of women involvement. And I really think that, Linda, your point too about not sort of the senior leadership who's way up at the top, but the middle leadership is actually a really important piece for women to be at, for young people and for people starting out, coming up, because sort of that top level is maybe a little far to see themselves as that's where I might end up being. But the mini levels are, okay, maybe in 5 years, okay, maybe in 10, okay, maybe it seems a little bit more attainable. And I think that those women in those middle leadership positions actually are still able to sort of have conversations with people starting out and maybe serve in mentor roles. So I think that at the varying levels of leadership going up, having female presence and the different kinds of work that lawyers do, like a trial team, like a negotiating team, like the ones that are at the table, so that young women are seeing themselves in different types of environmental legal jobs at different stages, I think is really important.
Ignacio might want to speak to, we were talking about the Osage, and I was with her one time, and they said, oh, well, who was your boss? At the Department of Justice, it was me. And, she's short, and she's petite, and she's sweet and lovely, and she is tough, as she needs to be. But, it can belie it. And so I would say, one of the other things that we all have a responsibility to do, and those other good non-women do as well, is to be very supportive. When you are in positions of being able to put a team together or put someone together, make sure you put that. Because I know I often get asked by young women after a talk or something, they say, oh, I want to be like you. And I said, oh, sweetheart, no, you don't. I said, if you have to do all the things because I was in Ruckelshaus One's office as an intern. That was where I started out. And we did the U.S. briefs for the meeting in Sweden in 1972. So you can count. That's how old I am. Anyway, I'm getting comfortable with it. Your hair is white. You got to get used to it. So, but it was just, it was really important to have, support of women. And there was a woman at EPA, Suzanne Smith, who's now about 87. She was a secretary. And I wouldn't have gotten anything done because she pointed out the real jerks. And but she knew stuff. Had she had the financial opportunity to go to college and to go to school, she could have run the whole place because she basically did. But she hadn't had that opportunity. And a generation or so ago, there were a lot of women who had far more capacity than they had access. And we've got to, head of the IMF, Christine Lagarde, she thanks the woman who took care of her children, as part of her life, as well as her mother. And I think we often have too many vertical hierarchies, and we as women in particular have an opportunity to take those structures, which only have one or two people at the top, turn them on their side. And this I got from my grandfather, but at any rate, and make them continuums of progress. So everybody's contribution has value in a process. And well, my favorite quote is from Bella, and it says, "I still believe women will change power. Women will change the nature of power before power changes the nature of women." So I'm not saying we are inherently more egalitarian. Maybe we just have more experience with it. Yeah, that's my nice way of saying it.
Well, going back to Seema's example of the group team preparing and then the men go to the trial, what would you tell the younger women on the team to do about that?
I think first is figuring out what's actually going on in a particular situation. I think sometimes it's a choice for a woman not to join a particular team, not to put themselves out there. And then the question is that really a choice, or is it not really a choice, right? So I think that is an important thing to figure out. So I think to answer your question about what would you tell the person, is it really their, I think that's what you have to get to, is asking them, well, what's going on here? What's the issue? Is there a problem? We're going to get to the next question here in a little bit, but I do think that sexual harassment is a really important issue that's playing out and might be a reason that some people are choosing not to do certain things. I think that sometimes people have family situations that are preventing them from doing something. So it's going back to what Linda said of, are the people that are making those teams cognizant of whether that's a choice or not a choice for any individual woman, and are the people that are putting those teams together able to help make it a choice for that person?
So since you raised it, did you all face, I'm going to start with Linda because she actually provided this question. Did you face discrimination or harassment? And how did you deal with it, if you did, and what was it?
So the first, I graduated from law school. I worked on Capitol Hill for 6 years, went back to Ohio to go to law school, and clerked at a law firm. And I did not get asked to join the law firm after I graduated, and I was crushed. And one of the lawyers who I knew real well, I'd actually gone to grade school with him, took me aside and he said, I want you to know who fought for you and who fought against you. And he said, I want you to know that nobody questioned your talent. I would have been the first woman in the law firm as well. I meant to say that. And he said, everybody agreed you were totally capable. And he said, but they weren't ready to have a woman in the law firm yet. This is 1980, 2. So it's not, yeah, we're not in the 70s, but we are.
No, we're in the 50s.
We are in Columbus, Ohio. Then he said, and this was true, one of the named partners of the firm, which is pretty, probably 20 lawyers, so it's on the small side. One of the named partners has a daughter who is currently in law school, and he wants her to be the first lawyer in this law firm. Like there could only be one. And I thank God every day that happened. Because I continued to look for jobs, and I found one at the USAPA. And if I had not come back to Washington and worked, first of all, I was so thrilled that this one partner had taken me aside and said, "You deserve the truth." I think about that often. Everybody deserves the truth, and it never occurred to me. I wanted to get on. I wasn't going to, sue or anything like that. But I at least left there with the confidence that I had achieved, right? But it actually turned out to be the best thing, because I ended up with a fabulous career that I would never have had. I would have stayed in Columbus, Ohio and practiced small town law. And I can guarantee you it would not have been as interesting. So I think frequently back, I remember that conversation at the bar with my friend when he told me all of this, and it worked out. Story 1. Story 2 is really kind of current. I won't name any names. There was a person at EPA who used to constantly make sexually suggestive comments that he thought were a riot. Oh. And this is also in the 80s. And I remember saying to him, they were inappropriate. They were never aimed at me. And he said, but the people I'm saying it to, they know I'm joking. There's absolutely no way they would think I'm being serious. And I said, well, you need to understand a couple of things. Number one, maybe they're just laughing because they don't know what else to do. They may know you aren't serious, but the people that are listening don't know that. So you may have a certain rapport with this young woman that's between the two of you, but the people standing around you are uncomfortable, which is why I'm raising it. And thirdly, it gives other men who aren't well-intended or who aren't funny license, because you are in a position of authority in the office and they are not. And so you are making it okay to say things that are not okay. And he, and I said it privately to him. I didn't, like in front of a bunch of people. Came up to me a couple days later and said, I have never had anybody explain it to me that way. And I will, and we both rolled our eyes, but he said, I'll do my best because you've made me think about it differently. So that was just another.
Yes and yes. Discrimination, yes. And
care to elaborate?
Not really, but sometimes I practice these things because they would happen so darn often. Sometimes, but in the 80s, I was a Department of Justice mediator in Iowa between farmers and creditors in advance of foreclosure stuff. And aside from the time, I remember one time the guy came in, he was $800,000 in debt. He needed to be quiet and thankful. He was getting an opportunity to save his butt. He, however, wasn't, because he felt he had so much privilege. He started questioning whether I knew how to place a sow herd, so he kept using more and more technical agricultural knowledge. And I said, we are here today to have a mediation to save your farm. Now, I have been given the power and capacity to sign off on your mediation. We don't have to have a mediation. I can sign it off and the bank can proceed with foreclosure tomorrow morning. So you obviously have a decision that you need to make on how you want to try and save your farm, and I'm here to help you. And he said, can we get another mediator? I said, no, but I'm picking up my pen. That's how I handle that one.
Anyone else want to add?
Sure. Well, as we know, race undergirds our society. And when you're a community-based organization, working in a community of color and you're a person of color, people are not very interested in supporting you, and high donors are not very interested in supporting you. They're interested in supporting, you know, a national environmental regulation. They're not necessarily interested in supporting the empowerment of a base of people to help develop new environmental policy that would be protective of communities. And so organizations like mine do not get the kind of resources and support that they need. We're always doing an incredible amount with very, very little. And I think the perception is, well, gee, you know, I've had people sort of pat me on the back and say, you're doing a great job with so little, keep on doing it. And, yeah, I mean, like, that's the role of a community-based person, to be at your beck and call, to be a consultant, to be an advisor for free, to have lunch with you and give you more advice on diversity or whatever it is for free, while you are struggling each year to meet your budget. So the racism and the bias against community empowerment and social justice in philanthropy is very, very significant. And I see that every day. Many times when I'm with my colleagues, they will say, well, we can do the outreach and we'll do the policy work. Really? Why is that? I've got some attorneys and policy people on my staff. Why do you see us as relegated to simply knocking on doors and doing outreach? Because the reasons that we do that is so that people can weigh in and speak for themselves and help develop protective policies, because they are the most effective. So every day, 31 years of doing this work at We Act, and it's fairly much the same. We might have cracked into, and let me just say that, you know, when a consultant comes and says, well, who's your competition? And I think about it, and it sounds crazy to say NRDC or EDF or Justice, but in the environmental grant making programs, those are the only other people who are getting funding. So in many respects, that is who you're up against. And I think that there's a political shift, and that people understand that equity and diversity is going to help us win. I think the environmental community now understands that they have not won because they have not brought the public along. They have not developed the kinds of values that all of us, or many of us, espouse, and that they are not going to win until they begin to develop the kinds of coalitions and partnerships with everyone in all communities that are going to help save all of our communities and the earth.
Yes to both discrimination and harassment. I've had, you know, on discrimination, certainly on racial and ethnic grounds, people assuming I don't speak English, wanting me to change my name so it's easier to pronounce. On harassment, you know, people advancing, me refusing, and then saying that they're not going to give me a good reference letter. I mean, all kinds of things. And I would say that this comes up with students on a way too frequent basis. And I do think that we're in an era of Me Too movement, and I think that that harassment in the workplace for women is a very serious issue and a very important issue that needs to be discussed amongst women. And I actually think it's an area of mentorship that's really important for women to talk about with their mentees about how to handle, because it's not clear. I've seen way too many women report things and nothing actually happen. I've seen women choose not to join great cases because they don't feel comfortable on travel with particular men that they're going to be working with. So I do think that it is, I think it is a thing that is harming women in general from advancing and choosing to advance in leadership positions. And I think it is pervasive in a lot of workplaces. And it's really an area that I see students coming to me about on a very regular basis. So I think it's a really, really important topic and really worth women that are more senior and that are acting as mentors to make sure that they're reaching out and talking with mentees, and for men as well, to be very cognizant and reaching out to their own mentees to make sure that young women are in safe and comfortable work environments.
Well, one of the great things about getting, I just don't give a damn anymore, you know. So it usually gets a laugh, but maybe it's because it's too serious and too close. But I mean it seriously. One of the things that as I've gotten older, I get more comfortable with humor, but it's tricky. But you know, you can say things, you know, like, I know you didn't mean that to be offensive, but it was. Now that's kind of light, but the message is there. So the other thing is to try and figure out your own comfort style, because you're gonna need one. It's just, you know, maybe in 21 something, it really will be different, but it's a long time till we get there. And so in the meantime, you really have to find a way to not become harsh, not to let it harden your heart, etc., but to find a way to protect yourself. You know, for me, as I've gotten older, you know, I can kind of handle humor a little bit. I know we're coming to the end, and I want to say one thing, because I'd be remiss if I didn't. Very early on my list were my two grandmothers, because they were critical. For one grandmother, I was her only grandchild, and for the other grandmother, I was her first grandchild. And the one for whom I was the first grandchild, Nell Scott Bishop Dillon, she was only married once. This last month was the centenary of when she graduated from Tuskegee for an undergraduate degree, and her faculty advisor was George Washington Carver. And so, see, you get it, you know. So I mean, that was a serious role model. My other grandmother sang German lieder and studied voice at Fisk, and they were pretty well off. So she had her own gardener and stuff. And so she was short. So I was the only person in the family shorter than she was. And so she had two stools, one for me and one for her. And early in the morning, this was in Dallas, early in the morning, and the other grandmother eventually became the only woman in the business department and in the chair of the business department at a small HBCU in Oklahoma, Langston University. But back to my Dallas grandmother. She would take me out in the mornings, and, you know, we would water the lawn before the gardener came. And they had the same sad little joke every morning. Miss Harden, what you doing at my garden? She said, you know that's my garden. And they had the same joke every day. But she taught me spirea, pyracantha, and nandina bushes. She had her own koi pond. She, you know, would put up pear preserves and things. And she made the best peach cake and ice cream that would melt on it. But it was a sense, and I think for almost anyone, you'll find some story of who or the who's in your life really helped you understand and gave you a fundamental connection to the world and its mystery and its joy and its beauty. And I am just ever grateful to have encountered so many incredible, wonderful people who were mentors and colleagues. So as we have sojourned along this way, Kathy is on that list, Bernice is on that list, and I'll get lost if I name everybody. But it's really been important to have that and to hold that and then to be one and to be available to other young people. And so we can do that. It's time for us to bring it to a close. Those are my closing comments.
Yes, we have a few minutes for questions. How about starting here in DC? Yes. We've got a microphone.
I'm sorry, where are you at? Over here?
Hey, Kathy, we should mention that the folks who are on the webinar, if they hustle to send something in through the webinar portal, we'll see what we can do with those.
Right. Have you gotten any yet, or?
Oh, they're coming in.
Okay.
Hi, I'm Jean Conconner at Kirkland and Ellis. Since our question is women's leadership, I'm wondering, have you seen a change in the corporations that are really taking the helm and pushing for climate change developments, or even with the recent development with some of the automakers in terms of not rolling back some of the environmental requirements? What role do you see women playing there?
I thought you were headed one way and then you went to
Yeah,
another. I believe that in the companies that understand sustainability and climate change in a great way, meaning they see it as part of a business strategy, I believe that those are going to be the successful companies of the future, because they are targeting their research and development to technologies that society needs. It is a part of their consciousness. It is what attracts many of the young, bright students, male and female, to those companies. And at DuPont, the HR recruiters would always come to me and say, what's our current story? What's our current strategy? How are we doing? Where are we on climate change? We need to be very current when we go out to the university. So I think it is a bottom line issue. It's a recruiting issue. It's a retention issue. How much of that is driven by the women in those organizations? Less clear. I don't mean that in a bad way. I haven't seen any data that shows me the connection between this company had women at certain levels and they made those decisions.
Well, Catalyst has provided some of that.
Okay.
The organization Catalyst. And certainly my experience with Ray Anderson and Interface, which by almost any stretch of the imagination, I'm not at Interface. It's very sticky, no matter how much I keep trying to say it. I'm not at Interface anymore. But anyway, when he asked me to be on the board, that was 1997. And he said, Diana, I need you to come help me change the world. That was his invitation to be on the board. So I knew I was going to a very particular kind of place. And within a year, we had created the category of recycled carpeting. We took glue out of all of the product lines and a whole host of other things. So there have been critical, really, really early individuals. And when that is, matched with the fact that the person is the founder of the company, has never sold a share of stock, he has a heavy weight to be able to make a decision inside the company. But it is a process that I think is happening. You get people like, I shouldn't try and think. I should say things before I try and think. I can't think of her name at S.C. Johnson Wax, who was there for a long time.
Kelly Samaro?
No.
Jane Nelson? No, not Jane. Shatterley. Yeah. Jane Shatterley.
No, but I'll get her name. But she had license. And that, I think maybe that's the key thing. And it's not always women, but it's often women. And also there have been some really key companies like Novo Nordisk and with Lisa Kangel in Denmark. I think if you go through, there are these real pockets in different countries as well. And that was the one thing I hope we brought up, that there have been amazing women who've been in leadership positions in other places around the US. So I don't want us to get too much hubris about how great the US is on this. We all have a long way to go, but there have been some key allies in other countries. So Jane Hutterly at SCJ. It was Jane Hutterly.
Jane Wright.
Yeah.
Hi, she's bringing you the microphone.
Hi, I'm Carol Green. I have an environmental law practice in Bethesda. And first of all, thank you. I am inspired. And I've been doing this a long time, and I wonder if each of you would address a remark to those of us who are younger in this audience, because you are all dynamic women with wonderful personal qualities. And what is it about your own personal being that has enabled you to succeed in the face of adversity?
Anyone?
I will just jump in and say, I think having a sense of humor has helped a lot, because it gets you through the bad days. It makes you enjoy the good days, and it allows you, Diane talked about, you can use humor to get places that you can't otherwise always get. So I think appreciating humor, having a sense of humor, and not taking yourself too seriously can be critical.
And I would say optimism and perseverance. I think it's very enervating to be able to have a vision and see it through. And that's what really makes you get up out of bed every day. Those opportunities that you've had and you've really made something happen. And that keeps you going through the hard times and the years when you have the wrong legislature and you can't get anything through. And guess what? You know, just yesterday we got a Child Safe Products Act in the state legislature. We may have a Climate Community Protection Act. It seems like it's still being worked on, so I'm not quite sure where it is. But it's really that perseverance, and you've got to have optimism. You've got to have hope that even if I go to this meeting, if I, put time into this new initiative, that maybe it's going to work out. Maybe it's going to create an opportunity for what we all need.
I would say for me, probably quiet confidence. I think confidence is a really important thing, and I think that having an internal confidence, and maybe internal confidence is better than quiet, but I mean similar, that it's something that's buried within, and that if you have that baseline confidence in yourself, that you can get through something. If you work hard, it'll be achievable. Whatever the struggle is, this too shall pass. But if you've got the confidence that you can push yourself forward and achieve something, that will carry you through.
I would say whatever was hard, I lived through it. I'm serious, because we look at someone like Berta from Honduras, who was murdered because of what she believed in. There's a wonderful book by Alice Walker, my favorite book of hers. Anything we love can be saved. And there's a wonderful part where she talks about funerals becoming celebrations. I don't want to focus on funerals too much, but becoming celebrations, and realizing when you have allies, hold on to them, support each other. I also, because this is the way I do it, Kira Gould is probably in the audience in San Francisco. Hi. She and Lance Hosey wrote this book, Women in Greed, and they were kind enough to ask me to write the preface. And I did it kind of as an essay about where we were overall. It's only 2 pages. It's really good. You should read it. But the book is even better. No, seriously, the book is even better because it's talked about the way in which you didn't go necessarily looking for this, but now that it's here in front of you, you can't walk away from what's going on. And whether you are an attorney, an activist, whatever, remember, don't let the tyranny of the vertical hierarchy prevent you from doing something. Put it on the side. We all have a role to play in saving our earth. In fact, what I always say is now it's time to mother earth as a verb.
More questions?
We also have some online if we want to conclude with
You
one
wanna
final
try this?
online question. It's directed towards the whole panel. How do you think the women's movement can work more closely with the environmental movement? In other words, how can feminism work with environmental justice?
Did you hear?
Well, yeah.
Okay.
I'd say a significant amount of the environmental justice leaders are women. And I think the movers and shakers in our community are women. If I look at New York City and I look at our community boards, most of them are chaired by women. They are the ones who are in the community ensuring that we have a safe and sustainable community. So I do believe that women's leadership is foremost when you look at community-based work. And of course, we need that to move into other fields. We see it also in academia. We have some incredible academic researchers and partners who have really promoted the field of environmental justice. There are women who have helped develop majors in environmental justice in universities, who are writing in textbooks about the case studies that are going on and the issues and initiatives that are going on around the country. And so I think if we also look at many of the prize winners, Wangari Maathai, a lot of the Goldman Prize winners, they have been women. And I think when we're looked at for the work that we're doing ourselves and not in competition with others, we're awarded and we're recognized.
Another insight from the panel on that last question?
Well, that's
Well
good.
said.
Well, I'd like to extend a huge thank you to our audience for joining us today and for your thought-provoking questions. We hope you'll continue to think about the many facets, obstacles, and successes of women in developing U.S. environmental law and policy. I want to extend a massive thank you to our fantastic panel, Kathy, Diane, Linda, Seema, and Peggy. You've all contributed so much. Thank you for lending your expertise and leadership to this seminar as well to the field itself. I'd like to give a huge round of applause. Feel free to join us now in the lobby for reception. You can continue this conversation and pose a few more questions.